There it goes. Better. I'm the only one participating. Oh, there's some people. There's 3 others. Today's what, Tuesday? So we met it's just slow. I tap on a thing and then it just like waits. Be more patient. Oh, it's just this room. There we go. Oh, they're starting to file in now. So I'm sharing the screen. Yeah, we're getting started. It's the auditorium. It's not me. Trust me. I've been waiting to start this meeting is longer than you guys. Let's see. All right. Okay. Let me go ahead and try to get started here. Let's see. That's on. That's good. Okay. I think. Oh, here we are. I thought I had this open already. That looks good. Let me fix this screen. That looks good. Okay, finally. Oh, let me get my clock. So class gets over at 12:20. Is that right? Okay. Let's see. I'm thinking last time we went through all this. Remember her? And did this. We were talking about, remember that? That's your reason, wasn't it? Then we get to like.
We didn't get this far.
No? Huh?
No, I think we ended at the last slide of the girl and the cat.
Come on. Is that right?
Ipsilateral.
I'm going the wrong way. Page up. With the girl with the cat?
Ipsilateral was the last thing that we were on.
Okay, I must be thinking of a different class then. Ipsilateral. On the same side, okay, we didn't talk about contralateral or anything like that. Ipsilateral on the same side of the body, and then contra, get it? Not, it's on the opposite side of the body. Like, well, I think that last time I probably gave you the example of ipsilateral structures like the gallbladder and the appendix, or ipsilateral. But contralateral will be, things on the opposite side of the body, like the gallbladder, which is upper right quadrant, and then over here in the upper left quadrant would be the spleen. Those are two good contralateral internal structures. And of course, all your appendages, opposing appendages, would be contralateral, I guess. So your right arm, left arm, those would be contralateral. But deeper things that are unpaired, you can identify some of those. Okay. Next are proximal and distal. Let me page up a little bit. Right here, these two directional terms. Proximal and distal. A lot of times when you hear that, they're referring to appendages. You see, proximal means like toward the origin, and distal means away from the origin, assuming that your appendages originate or start at the axis. So they begin at the axis and like grow out. And they developmentally, that's basically how they do grow. And so the attachment point of the appendages would be the origin. And so if you're moving toward the attachment sites, like the arm attaches, but the shoulder, the legs attached to the hips, moving in a proximal direction. And then away from that would be distal. For example, the ankle would be distal to the knee is distal to the hip, etc. Or you can say that the elbow is proximal to the wrist is proximal to the digits, etc. That's appendages. You can also use proximal and distal in referring to ducts and tubes and canals and things like that. For example, the alimentary canal or the GI tract, it starts at your mouth, it ends at your anus. And so things that are, if you think of it like things flowing downstream, things flow, food goes from your mouth down toward your anus. And so the alimentary canal or your GI tract is just not like a simple little tube, it has special sections. And of course, we're gonna learn all about that when we talk about the digestive system, the different regions of it. It begins with your mouth, your oral cavity, and it segues to the esophagus, then the stomach, and the small intestine, large intestine, and so on and so forth. So to identify different portions of that, you would move from proximal to distal segments of the alimentary canal. For example, your stomach would be distal to the esophagus, but at the same time, your stomach would be proximal to your small intestine. Does that make sense? And the distal most portion of the alimentary canal, you could say, would be the rectum. Or the proximal most portion would be your oral cavity or buccal cavity or your mouth. How about that? And so we'll use this terminology in talking about different structures. Okay. And then superficial and deep, you probably had these terms before. If you've ever taken like a first aid class and you learn about different types of injuries or bobos, if you get like a little surface, little wound, little scrape, they usually call it a superficial abrasion. And so something that's more serious and deeper that probably needs stitches, it's called a deep evulsion. So it's either closer to or further away from the surface. If it's at the surface, it's not that serious. But as you're moving further away from the surface, you're going deeper down into underlying tissues. And so that's good to identify positions in an organ going from away from the surface or to deep. So superficial tissues, you go from superficial to deep, say like on your arm, whatever. The superficial most tissues would be the epithelial tissue, or the skin. We just call it the skin right now, or your integument. And then deep to the integument would be the subcutaneous tissues like the fat, and then deep to the fatty layer would be the muscular layer, and the deep to muscle is bone, etc. Or you can say it the other way around. The tissue that's superficial to bone would be muscle. The tissue that's superficial to muscle would be fat. The tissue that's superficial to fat would be skin. That's, just gonna get your directions right in talking about organs like that. And also, it's useful when you're talking about hollow organs, particularly when we get into laboratory and you're looking at images from under the microscope, and particularly hollow organs, where you get like a cross section through some kind of tube or duct or something like that, and the hollow portion of it, when under the microscope, it's going to look like a donut. Okay, and the donut has a hole in the middle, the donut hole. When microscopy, the donut hole is called the lumen, L-U-M-E-N, the lumen, because that's where light passes through, because there's nothing there, there's no tissues. The lumen is there for a reason. That's where material of some sort is going to be passing through that space, all right? And the lumen is always the deepest most layer, okay? And then from the lumen, you would move to the exterior of the structure, or the outside or the superficial most layer, okay? So you go from superficial to deep towards the lumens. And so lining the lumen would be the deep tissue, and then lining the outside of the duct or structure would be the superficial tissue. And so you're going to see different layers of tissue between the outer surface or the superficial surface and the lumen or the deepest surface. And we'll see those. In lab, you'll see that a lot. Okay, now for the my naked models. These are actually a couple of students from this author's, I guess from his class. I guess they did this for extra points or something. How about that? Brave individuals. But anyway, what's his name? Well, I guess Saladin. These are a couple of Saladin's students who are working for extra points, I guess. But we're talking about directional terms. When I said directions, you go north, south, east, and west. And then, of course, you get regional terms like, you live in the Northeast or Southwest Louisiana, or you got folks that live out west or whatever, where your body has regional terms too. And they're all broken down into two main regions of the body, the axis of the body, or axial regions. The axial regions would be everything other than the arms and legs. Of course, that would be your head, your neck, and your trunk, or your torso. Your torso is basically your axis minus your neck and head. And then all the regions and subregions of your arms and legs and digits would be the appendicular regions. And of course, it's basically everything else. So axial regions and appendicular regions. So what I do is I go through them. Biologists love to, again, put everything in an outline format, group everything. It makes it convenient. And so we got axial regions and types of axial regions, et cetera. And a lot of this terminology and verbiage is going to be real familiar to you. Some of the terms are nouns, and then sometimes you can just change up the spelling of the noun a little bit and turn it into an adjective. So the adjective describes something of that noun, right? And so like this first word here, cephalic, is an adjective. It refers to something head-like or of the head, like your head, not real specific, but you'll see where we use variants of this term. Occipital could be an adjective, could be a noun, because you actually have a bone called the occipital bone. That's the bone of your skull, in the back of your skull, or the occipital region just could be the back of the head. It can be like a sub-region of the cephalic region, okay? Likewise, in the front, you have a frontal bone, or your frontal region could just be your forehead, right? And then cervical. Cervical is an adjective. the noun would be cervix, C-E-R-V-I-X, cervix. Say cervix. So what's my cervix? I thought that's a female anatomical structure. It is, but that's specifically the neck of the uterus. And so neck, you have other things that are cervical. You know, you can have like a pap smear is called a cervical scraping. You're talking about taking scrapings of the cells from the cervix, but also your neck, you know, part of your axis. That's usually what we're talking about here. Could be things can be cervical, like the vertebrae that are in your neck are called cervical vertebrae. Okay, so the bottom line is it just refers to the neck or the neck of something. The orbital regions, those are your orbits, those are your eye sockets. So anything of that or surrounding that. Nasal is pretty easy, like nasal, nose, nasal spray goes up your nose, right? Buccal, that's a kind of a different one. I mean, it refers to your cheeks, the walls of your oral cavity. How about that? Mental means chin, or things of the chin or of the jaw or the mandible, all right? And then torso, and I said torso trunk, kind of the same thing. Well, again, the torso is your axis excluding your neck and head, and of course it's your entire body minus the limbs. So you have here I have portions of the torso. If you're looking at it more specifically, you got anterior torso, posterior torso, and inferior torso. We look at these little subregions of the torso. So regions of the anterior and torso include the sternal region. That's an adjective. The noun would be sternum. Your sternum is your breastbone. Look right here. This one's kind of see-through, this individual. And you see the breastbone of the sternum. And so the sternal region doesn't have to be just of the bone, but it can be the center of the chest right here. All right, sternal region. Axillary is an adjective. The noun is axilla, or which would be singular. Axillae with the E on the end is plural. You have armpits. Your armpits are your axillary regions or your axilla. Okay, armpit. You have things in there like axillary lymph nodes and axillary nerves and blood vessels, etc. Okay, costal, costa means rib, costal means of the ribs, and so your costal regions are the areas of the torso where you have ribs, and you've got costal nerves and muscles, etc. So things associated with the ribs. Now, the word thoracic, that's an adjective. The noun is thorax, T-H-O-R-I-X, thorax, your thorax, A-X, A-X. I'd have to spell that. Sometimes you got to write down things to see how you spell it. T-H-O-R-A-X, I think. Google it, whatever. Spelling doesn't make a difference in here. I'm not asking you to spell anything because I can't spell too good either. Anyway, thorax is the noun, and thorax literally refers to the rib cage, or sort of something that's thoracic refers to of the rib cage. Now, it could be the entire, all the way around, but here I just kind of stuck with my anterior torso. But what it really is your torso, the superior torso, or the portion of your torso that contains ribs. And so it's everything anterior, not anterior, everything, well, in a quadruped it'd be anterior, but in a human, be everything superior to or above the diaphragm. And so you can't really see a diaphragm here, but if you palpated the torso anteriorly, you feel the ribs like right here and here. See, here you can see them. And just underneath the ribs right there, you would assume that's where your diaphragm is, because that's where it is. And so everything up here. So what we're doing is we're talking about like the top half of the torso minus the boneless portion that's down here, minus the thoracic vertebrae. But there's no ribs down here. There's no ribs down here. And so we're going to see that's the abdominal portion. But the thoracic would be everything up there, where you have your thorax, okay? Pectoral. Now we had an axillary, we had a sternal region. Now pectoral will be the lateral, like the chest. Now you can say, is that her breast? No, that her breasts are actually upon the pectoral region. So that like you have your pectoral muscles, the musculature that's under there. So it's, you know, the superior lateral aspect of the torso. How about that? Pectoral region, which just means chest. Now, mammary means of the mammae or mamma. Usually have mammae is plural, which means breast. So mammary means of the breast. You have mammary. Now, what you're looking at here, you say, well, these are mammary glands. Well, that technically, no, these are breast. Mammary glands may occur in breast, but not, that's kind of like a human thing. We've talked about, wasn't this class when we were talking about sexual selection? Did we talk about that in here? No, probably not. Could you give me that blank stare? Yeah. This only humans have perpetual breast, okay? I mean, only mammals produce milk with mammary glands, because we're the only vertebrate that makes milk, right? And they all have breast-like structures that support the mammary glands. But most mammals only have visible breasts, or teats, you can call them, when they're lactating or producing milk. But not humans. Human females have breasts all the time. That's just a secondary sexual characteristic in our species, that the females have these integumentary ornamental structures on the front of their chest. They have kind of reduces the breast to something very anatomical and dry. They integumentary ornamental structures. But yeah, think about that. You know, if you look at a dog, you've had a female dog, and she's had puppies, and you can see that she has little bitty breasts, little bitty teats, or whatever you want to call them, little bitty boobies hanging down underneath her. Oh, look at her, she must have puppies. She's nursing. But when she's done nursing, what happens? They disappear, they dry up. But human females aren't like that. They, you know, just because you have breasts doesn't mean that you're nursing or lactating. So why are they there? What are they doing? You know, and so that's just a dimorphic structure that we have in our species, that human females possess this ornamentation in the form of breast that are due to sexual selection. That's a whole other thing, another discussion. You can Google and read all about sexual selection in humans, and it's basically one of the things that identifies one gender versus the next. You know, there's things that anytime you have anatomical features or morphological features that are sex specific, you know, they're identified in only that gender, it's due to sexual selection. You know, like everybody can recognize a buck versus a doe deer, right? A buck versus a doe. You know, the buck is the one with the horns, right? Generally. Or like a male peacock versus a female peacock. You know, the male peacock has all the beautiful feathers, and the hen is kind of a real drab, kind of greenish color. They're not real pretty. Why is that? You know, it's all about mate selection, and mate selection is due to sexual selection. Anyway, Google that if you want to read about that. Okay, so abdominal region. Look right here, I have the abdominal region marked off in, we have 9 quadrants of the abdominal region we typically recognize, all kind of revolving around the bullseye, the dead center right here, which is kind of right around, you know, you've marked this off in 9 quadrants. The center one would be the umbilical region. And it's named after that structure that's right there in the center where my laser is, that's the umbilicus, or your belly button, or your navel, you want to call it that. And so the other 8 regions, in reference to their position of the umbilical region. For example, the epigastric region, it's part of the abdominal region, but it's specifically that quadrant superior to the umbilical region. If you look at epi, means above, gastric means gut, and gut, you would just assume the center of the abdomen or your umbilical region, okay? And then just the opposite of that, hypogastric, below the gut. That again, if you consider the center of your belly, the gut, your umbilical region, so below that. And then hypochondrial, you have 2 of these, the left and the right, hypochondriac regions or hypochondrial regions. And that's, here's the right one, there's the left one on either side of the epigastric regions, which means literally like below the ribs, you know, it's kind of a rib. You'll see some ribs here on the sides. So there's ribs there. And then costal region, costa means hip, costal means of the hips. And so these are on either side of the umbilical region. These are costal regions, basically where your love handles are, costal regions. Now the pubic region means of the pubis. The pubis is singular for, it's a bone. We have 2 pubis bones that articulate right here in the center. And so here I have, it's not this quadrant right here. It's not technically part of the abdominal region. It's the inferior abdominal region, basically where you have your pubic hair, or it's under the hypogastric region. So here I have inferior hypogastric. How about that? Now, don't confuse the pubic region with the inguinal region. A lot of times people use them interchangeable because they'll use, well, they misidentify the word groin, because your inguinal region is your groin. Your groin, well, I don't know. A lot of times people will use the word your pubic region as your groin. I got kicked in the groin. And it's like kicked in the crotch. Well, that's the problem. Both these words, inguinal and pubic, mean groin, literally groin, but they're not referring to the same region. Your inguinal region is basically like your legs equivalent to your armpits. How about that? Remember, your axillary region is basically where your arms attach, or your inguinal region is basically where your legs attach. So your inguinal region is a little bitty triangle right here, I guess, right here and here, inguinal regions. You have inguinal lymph nodes, inguinal arteries, veins. It's basically, again, where the union of the leg or the inferior appendage and the torso. How about that? So here I kind of have between the pubic and coxal regions, so kind of sandwiched in right there. And you would palpate, or you could palpate the inguinal region, which would be up in this area, not the crotch. So because you have lymph nodes there and so on and so forth. So there you go. Anterior torso. Flip it over, yet posterior torso, looking in the back. Of course, vertebral after vertebrae, those are the bones in your vertebral column or your spine. You run your finger down the center of somebody's back, and you feel the vertebrae. So vertebral is the center of the posterior torso. Scapular, or scapula would be the noun, right? That's your shoulder blades. And so your scapular region would be the superior portion of the posterior torso laterally. How about that? So there's 2. There's a left and right posterior scapular regions. Lumbar, you have lumbar vertebrae. Your lumbar region would be the entire lower back. Okay, it's kind of like the posterior portion of the abdominal region. Okay, so it'd be all of this. It basically the boneless minus, you got vertebrae right here. Where's vertebrae? Right here. This, look at the lumbar, it means loin, you know, like a tenderloin. You know, like kind of creepy looking at naked people and thinking about and talking about cuts of meat. But you know, if you take a cut of meat from here, this is like where your tenderloin is. Why is it so tender? Because there's no bone right there. There's no ribs here, the ribless portion. Of course, I guess on that part of a cow or a pig or something would be good tender meat right there. Sacral. Sacral means of the sacrum. The word sacrum literally means to sacrifice. This is that bone of sacrifice, or the where you sacrifice it. Well, you got to sacrifice that. You throw it away, like if you're cleaning a bird or a chicken, or I guess any other kind of fowl, right? You got cuts. You got cuts of meat. You got chicken pieces. You got legs or drumsticks. And you got thighs. You got wings, and you got breast, right? But that's not the entire animal. You're missing something. You're missing the back. They usually call it the back of the chicken, which is basically, it includes the sacrum, but in bird anatomy, that birds don't have a sacrum. They have a synsacrum, which is part of the pelvis and the sacrum fused together. But we basically just call it the back of the chicken. But usually that's the part that you throw away. So when you're butchering an animal, no, you don't eat this. You can kind of imagine the sacrum here in the back. Remember you had a little triangle in the front, the pubic region? Well, you got a little triangle in the back, right here. That's where the sacrum, the apex of the sacrum, right here at the top of the butt crack or the gluteal cleft. All right, and it kind of forms a triangle like this. So that's your sacral region. So here I have inferior vertebral. So you got vertebrae, and the vertebral region would stop right about here. All right, and so right here, this little triangle in the back would be your sacral region. Of course, gluteal, there's your gluteal. Your gluteus was buttock. Gluteal means of the buttock, or your butt, your butt cheeks, right? Like I said, you have a gluteal cleft or gluteal cleavage, you can call it. Now you know what it's technically called. Next time you see somebody's butt crack, say, hey, pull your pants up. You can see your butt crack, like a plumber. They always talk about a plumber. You always see the butt crack with the heavy tool belt or whatever pulling their pants down. You can say, well, no, you don't say the butt crack showing. Your gluteal cleavage is exposed. How about that? Or your gluteal cleft. There you go. Okay. Anterior, posterior, and inferior. Inferior means members underneath. So I don't have a shot of this, but you imagine these guys straddling a horse, the part that hits the saddle. That's your inferior torso, and we have a name for that. Or you commonly refer to it as your crotch. That's your perineal region, or your perineum is basically your crotch. Peri means around or surrounding, and neum, it means anus. So around the anus, or basically the area where your anus would be, and other structures too. But it's the inferior pelvic floor. That's another way of saying it. Or like I like to say, it's the part that sits in the saddle, your crotch, okay? Perineal region, or your perineum would be the noun, okay? And you have different types of perineia. All right, so that's all the axial regions. Appendicular, the arms and legs. Of course, you have superior appendages, inferior appendages. Your superior appendages be your arms, from your shoulder out to the tips of your fingers. And to distinguish between them, most of if you break your appendages down into segments, each segment has a different name. Usually, you will see it kind of blends together by the time you get out to the fingers. But the initial segment of the superior appendage, or forelimb, if you have a horizontal axis, is the brachial region, or the brachium. And the brachium typically, or the initial segment only has one bone. And we'll look at this when we do the skeleton. Of course, the one bone that's in the brachium is the humerus, right? So the initial segment, it's everything between the shoulder and the elbow. How about that? The brachium or brachial region, okay? And then speaking of the elbow, the antecubital region, and the prefix anti, A-N-T-E, not A-N-T-I, that's something different. It means without, but A-N-T-E means preceding or before, or here anterior. So cubital is elbow. So before the elbow or anterior elbow. Your anterior elbow, that's like right there, the bend of your elbow, if you want to call it that. You have antecubital vessels. If there's any of you that are skilled in phlebotomy, that's the vein that you usually are looking for, the antecubital vein, okay, to do venipuncture. Anyway, the anterior elbow, you bend your elbow. Of course, antecubital before the elbow or anterior elbow. So just cubital by itself would be your elbow. So that's your posterior elbow. Sometimes, what forms your elbow is a process of the ulna called the olecranon. And so, or olecranon process. And so sometimes hear that? That's my elbow. Can y'all hear that? Got some pretty loud bones. Anyway, that's my ulna. A lot of times people think, oh, that's my funny bone. You hit your funny bone, oh, it hurts. Funny bone must be humerus, right? Funny, haha, humerus, get it? But no, your ulna is your haha ulna, and what you're actually striking is not your ulna, not your humerus, it's actually the radial nerve. What? So it's all confusing. So it doesn't make sense. And anyway, so structures of the olecranon or your elbow or your cubital region are also be called olecranal after the bone process. Anyway, they're interchangeable. So antebrachial or brachial, upper arm, antebrachial is not anterior arm, it's forearm. It's kind of like what comes, I guess, after the, I'm not sure why they chose this prefix, but antebrachial, your antebrachium is basically just your forearm between your elbow and your wrist. And of course, this is the second segment of your superior appendage, right? And you have segments of your legs too, but this is a secondary segment. And the secondary segment always has two bones. That's the ulnar and radius that are in there. That constitutes your antecubital, your antebrachium. And so things of the antebrachium would be antebrachial, okay? Then beyond the antebrachial region would be your wrist and your hand, all right? The wrist itself is your carpus, C-A-R-P-U-S, and things of the carpus would be carpal. Humans have 8 bones per wrist, or 8 carpal bones, all right? And so when we do the skeleton, we learn all about that. And so between the wrist and the hand, or beyond the wrist or distal to the wrist will be your palm or your metacarpus. Your metacarpus has 5, humans have 5 bones per palm. And so those are metacarpal bones, all right? And so just think of your hand, now you look at your hand, it looks like a solid thing with fingers attached. Well, inside there's corresponding bones. Those are the metacarpal bones. And so you have anterior and posterior portions of your hand. The anterior half of your hand, this part where your palm is, that's palmar region. Or the palmar region could also be referred to as the anterior metacarpal region, because that's what you're looking at. Because this is posterior metacarpal, all right? It could be at the bones, it just could be at the appendage. Now, pollex, P-O-L-L-E-X, pollex is it's a noun. It's identifies one of your digits. Of course, you have 5 digits, right? Per hand, 5 digits per foot. And they're all numbered, all right? And the numbering is consistent with all the bones. So like the metacarpal bones are numbered, et cetera, et cetera. The first digit, everybody knows that's your thumb. Well, if you didn't know, now you know. And your first digit has a special name, pollex. This is your pollex. Your second digit is always your pointer finger, your index finger. And your third digit, that's the bad one, the bird, your middle finger. And then I can't do this one very good. My middle finger, or not my middle finger, my ring finger is number 4. That's the 4th digit. And your 5th digit is your little pinky finger. Okay, so they're all numbered. Okay, and but like I said, the only one that has a special name is number 1, the pollex. All right. Now, what do you call all the other fingers? Well, they're just called digits. Okay, and so this is your 2nd digit, 3rd digit, 4th digit, 5th digit. Okay, and so things of the digits will be digital. Now, sometimes the word phalangeal is used, but phalangeal means specifically of the phalanges, and phalanges are bones. That's singular. That's plural. Singular is phalanx, Phalanx. Phalanx is singular. That's one bone in your finger. Each digit has more than one bone, okay? You actually have 14 phalanges per hand. You have 14 in this hand, 14 in this hand. And your toes are the same thing. You have 14 phalanges per foot. So you think 14, that's not, you get 5 digits, but 14 is not a multiple of 5. You think about that? So there must be some kind of discrepancy. There is. Look at all your digits. Your 2nd digit. I don't know if you can see. I don't know if I'm showing you this or not. See that? But all your digits go up, over, and down. See, up, over, and down, up, over, and down, up, over, and down. Except your thumb, it just goes up and over. It doesn't go down because it's missing a bone. So you got 3, 6, 9, 12, and 13, 14. Okay. Collectively, they're phalanges. There's no phalange. There's no such word. It's phalanges and phalanx. 1 would be a phalanx. 3 would be a phalanges. Okay, does that make sense? And we're going to see your feet are the exact same way. The nomenclature, the naming of the bones is the same, except the thumb, except the first digit. They don't call it the pollex in the foot. They call it the hallux. Okay, we'll talk about that. And so I think that's it for the superior appendages. Now we just do the same thing for the legs. Femoral, your thigh. It's the initial segment of the inferior appendage, or everything between the hip and the knee. All right. The name of the bone, of course, the femur. And so it's a little bit different. You would think, well, humeral. Well, they would think that they would call the superior segment the humeral. I guess maybe that is a word. I don't know. They usually go brachial. But there's just femoral. It's just it could be the entire leg. Well, not the entire leg, but the portion of the leg between the hip and the knee could be considered the femoral region, or your thigh. How about that? Now look at this, patella. Patella is a noun. The adjective, you put an R on the end, be patellar, right? And you actually have a bone called the patella. It's a special kind of ossified tendon, really, in your knee. Your kneecap is your patella, all right? It's kind of, it's included in the skeleton, the patella, the bone, the knee bone, the kneecap, so we call it that. It's really not part of the skeleton per se. But anyway, your anterior knee, which you put like a knee pad on, the whole thing could be considered your patellar region, but the patella itself specifically would be the bone that's there. Anyway, there's patellar. Now, remember you have a bend in your elbow, we have a bend in your knee. The bend in the posterior patellar region, or in the back of your knee, posterior knee, it's called the popliteal region. That's your popliteal. That's a fun word to say, isn't it? Popliteal, popliteal, if you want to say it like that. But that's the back of your knee, the bend of your knee, okay? The crural region is kind of a challenge for me to pronounce. Crural, there's too many R's in it for me. But your crural region is your anterior lower leg, or your shin, okay? And there's a bone in your shin bone, that's your tibia, the part that you hit on the coffee table, the hard part. Let's see if you can hear my shin. Can you hear that? You tapping on it, you hear that bone in there? Anterior lower leg. Well, your posterior lower leg is a sural, so it's like what's in the back, where your calf muscles are, and the musculature back there. You don't have a lot of muscle in the front. Most of your muscles in the back of your lower leg. Sural region would be like your calf region. Now look at this word, number 14. It's one vowel away from being your crotch. Think about that. Remember, perineal means around the anus. Peroneal, it has nothing to do, this just words, just letters, how they put them together. And it means surprisingly different things. A lot of languages are like that. You just change one little vowel, one little letter, and it makes a completely different word. Peroneal, peronium, means fibula. Your peroneus is another old word for the fibula. The fibula, remember your segments of your appendages, first segment, second segment. The second segment of your arm was everything between your elbow and your wrist, or your antebrachium. Well, everything between your knee and your ankle, it's called I don't have it on here. Well, I have portions of it. Collectively, it's called the shank. Sounds like a prison term, doesn't it? A shank. A shank, or am I confusing shiv? Is that a thing? I don't know the difference between a shank and a shiv. Y'all know something about that? Hope not. But anyway, in biology, the shank of an appendage is between the knee and the ankle. Okay, and then it's the second portion of the appendage. And there's two bones. Like you have your arm, your forearm, you have a radius and ulna, and then your shank, or your lower leg, you have a tibia and fibula. Okay, the fibula is always lateral in our anatomical position, lateral. All right, and then, oh, by the way, in the anatomical position, your thumb is always on the lateral position, in the anatomical position, and the lateral of the bones of the forearm, or antebrachium, would be the radius. And so the radius is lateral, the ulna is medial. So in your legs, the tibia is medial and the fibula is lateral. And it used to be called the peroneus. Anyway, the peroneal region is just your lateral lower leg. How about that? It's the outside of your leg, peroneal region. There you go. Now, get down to your ankle. Your ankle bones and your wrist bones are the same and kind of different, but our human hands and feet have evolved to turn out very different. I know they have digits and toes and things like that. They're kind of like finger-like, but we use our hands and feet, most of us anyway, very differently. And so the ankle bones and the wrist bones are ended up quite different. But the tarsus is your ankle, your tarsus. And of course, bones of the tarsus are tarsal bones. Remember, you have 8 carpal bones, but you only have 7 tarsal bones. So what happened to all my tarsal bones? Well, you'll see this if you study the evolution of the vertebrate skeleton. You'll see there's a tendency for bones to get lost, in particularly areas that you want to fortify or reinforce. Okay, and so they don't just disappear; they usually become incorporated in with other bones. And so, really, it seems like you would want to add bones to an area you want to make stronger, but no, not really. The fewer joints, the better. So it's more solid, more firm, so stronger. Less bones, more just solid bony mass. And so to strengthen the ankle, because we walk on our feet, right? We've reduced the number of bones in there. So 7, and we'll talk more detail about that later. Tarsal bones, tarsus, ankle, all right. Same kind of thing after the ankle bones, like after the wrist bones, you have carpus, metacarpus, and in the foot, you got tarsus, metatarsus, or metatarsal bones. Now, we had your palms, the bottom of your foot, I guess like the palm equivalent is like the plantar region. Planta means this is the sole of your foot, the bottom of your foot. So it's a sub-region, I guess you can say, of the metatarsal region. Because you wouldn't say the plantar region and talk about the top of your foot. It's only the bottom of your foot, the one that comes in contact with earth. And so those organisms that walk around on the soles of their feet are said to be plantigrade. Plantigrade means like goes or proceeds on the soles of the feet. But not everything walks like that. Think about that. Like dogs and cats, they don't walk on the soles of the feet. What do they walk on? They walk on their digits. You think about that? So they're not plantigrade, they're called digitigrade. So you got plantigrade animals, digitigrade, and those that walk on their keratinized integumental structures, in other words, their claws. Now, all vertebrates have a keratinized structure on the end of their digit, which you would call a fingernail, right? Fingernails are just modified claws. In apes, they're modified into nails. In let's see, how can I say this? In just some other mammals that have hooves. Is it hoofs or hooves? Actually, it's both forms are accepted. Anyway, they're called ungulates. Ungulates. Some people say ungulates. It means walks on their nails or walks on their hooves. Anyway, parts of your feet. Now, calcaneal. This is a specific, I guess, tarsal region, because that's an adjective. It means of the calcaneus. Your calcaneus is your heel bone. There's one. You have, remember, 7 tarsal bones, and we identify this one because it's the largest. It's the biggest. That's your big heel bone. You have a tendon that's attached to it that connects to your calf musculature, called the calcaneal tendon. Or there's an eponym. We talk about eponyms yet? Eponyms are words or terms that are named after people. It's like a person's name, because of the name, we're gonna have lots of eponyms. A lot of your modern contemporary anatomy books tend to shy away from eponyms, these old terms that are named after people. But I kind of like eponyms, as you're honoring certain individuals. But like I said, a lot of textbooks try to get away from them because they're not very descriptive. It's somebody's name. So what does that mean? So your contemporary books try to use more descriptive terms. Because your calcaneal tendon was originally called Achilles tendon. Achilles, that's an eponym. That's named after somebody named Achilles. Y'all know who Achilles was? Does anybody know? You know Achilles tendon? He was, I don't know if he was a god, but yeah, you're on the right track. He was in Greek mythology. How about that? He was an individual. I don't know if he was a demigod or a god or a mortal, you know. This is why you have to take classes like mythology and literature so you can learn about crap like this. But his only that's a metaphor that we use. He goes, oh, my only weakness, or my is say like oh, Boudin is my Achilles tendon. You know, why you say Boudin is my Achilles tendon? That's my only weakness. You know, oh, if there's Boudin, I gotta eat it. Or some people are like, oh, chocolate or whatever, you know, my Achilles tendon, my only weakness. Why? Where did that metaphor come from? Well, Achilles, his only weakness was his heel. As the story goes, kind of, I'll give you like the rushed version, is that Zeus made Achilles, this individual, his name was Achilles, to make him arrow-proof, like invincible, by encoding him in some kind of special solution. And what he did is he picked up Achilles by his heels and dipped him in a big vat of this potion. And wherever that potion came in contact with him, arrows couldn't penetrate, you know? So he was like in battle and arrows are bouncing off of him, but where Zeus was hanging on to his feet, his ankles, that the solution didn't touch. And so his only weakness was right there on his heels. And wouldn't you know it, Achilles got struck in the heel by just some random arrow in the battlefield. And supposedly that's deadly, I guess. It killed him, I think. Didn't he die from getting struck in the arrow by a heel? You know, that was his only. Anyway, the moral to the story is it's an eponym. Eponym is a structure named after somebody. And we're going to learn, although your book is like cutting edge and contemporary, and it's like telling you all the non-eponyms, the more descriptive. I'm going to share both of them because some of them you just can't shake, you can't get rid of. You're going to see, and you use them in everyday speech. Just about, you don't have to be an anatomy student. Like just about everybody knows what a fallopian tube is, right? Fallopian tube is part of the female's anatomy. You know, fallopian is an eponym. It's named after somebody. Gabriel Fallopius was the guy that first described the fallopian tube, or your eustachian tube. Your eustachian tube. Well, in a contemporary anatomy, your eustachian tube is called the pharyngotympanic tube, which connects your middle ear to your throat. And a fallopian tube, by the way, you're going to learn is the uterine tube or oviduct. Okay, but usually when you go to the, I don't know if you go to an OBGYN, I don't know if they would call your fallopian tube your oviduct. It sounds kind of too zoological for human healthcare, doesn't it? They usually call it a fallopian tube, I think. Anyway, but there's others that go on. I mean, we're going to see all these other eponyms in this course. Okay, carrying right along. Hallux, H-A-L-L-U-X, hallux. That's your, I mean, you have a pullix is your thumb, your hallux is your big toe, your great toe. Anatomy book's called the great toe. Does anybody call it your great toe? That's my great toe. It's your big toe. You just say big, B-I-G. It's my big toe, right? Or this little piggy went to market. This little piggy stayed home. This little piggy had roast beef. This little piggy, right? The big one, your hallux. Now look, number 19, digital. Did we have this already? Yeah, we did. Digital, phalangeal, just like your fingers. Your fingers are digits, your toes are digits. The bones of your toes are also phalanges. You would think of all the nitpicky, hair-splitting things that they have in anatomy, that they would have special nomenclature to distinguish fingers from toes, but they don't. Go figure. They don't, you know. Although the wrist bones and ankle bones are different, most of them anyway. But the bones of the digits don't have special names, other than they're numbered, but you can't distinguish them from your fingers and toes. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. Okay. So, directional terms, regions. Now we're going to start chopping people up. You chop them up in certain, not just random. We have to identify the body planes and segments of individuals, and they have names. So here are body planes. Body planes are imaginary lines that divide your subject into sections, and we identify these different planes or sections. Planes, sections can be used interchangeably. Or body axes, like the axis of the body. There's two. Well, there's three axes: X, Y, and Z axis. Remember, the X axis is horizontal. Going from left to right, that's X, right? And the up and down, that's the vertical axis is Y, and the one that goes to and fro, coming out at you, to make it like 3D, that's your Z axis, X, Y, and Z axes. So the horizontal plane, or the X axis, that's horizontal, right? And so if you cut along the plane or horizontally, that's a transverse section. Okay, in humans, it's called transverse. Or if you section the individual and you have a superior and inferior portion, or a top and a bottom half, that would be a horizontal section or a horizontal plane. This section is also called an X-sec, or X stands for cross. Get it? Cross, X. Nobody says X-sec, X-sec. Everybody says cross section. So a cross section is a horizontal section or a transverse section. Okay, so it's the same thing. So horizontal, and then there's vertical up and down, and the y-axis. Although you're going to see that there's two different types of vertical sections because we're three-dimensional, right? Vertical sections are also called longitudinal sections. Longitudinal means lengthwise. You're cutting the length of the individual, but you can cut it in two different ways. It doesn't really matter. All vertical sections, doesn't matter if they're what axis you're talking about, Y or Z. They're all going to be at right angles to the horizontal. How about that? So to distinguish them, the two different types of vertical sections, you have one, this is a type of vertical section, a frontal section. Frontal section divides your subject into anterior and posterior portions. So you get a front half and a back half. Okay, frontal section. You cut this section. You have a front half and a back half. Now, sometimes when you're talking about just the head, sectioning the head or sectioning the brain, you see the word coronal. Coronal section, frontal section is the same thing. Like if you section the head and you got a face on one end, the back of your head, or the frontal region and the occipital region. The frontal region is produced, well, that would be produced with a coronal section. Okay, coronal means corona means crown, like where you wear a tiara or a crown, and you actually have a joint up there called the coronal suture. So like this, can you see what I'm doing like that? That's where your coronal suture is. And so it's a coronal section cutting it like that. So how else could you do it? Well, you can do it like this. You can cut like this or like this. So if you're cutting like this, you don't have front and back halves, you have left and right halves. Okay. And so those are called sagittal sections. Now, you have two different types of sagittal sections. You can produce equal left and right halves or unequal left and right halves. If a section like this or this, it's unequal, right? Only right down the middle. If you're cutting specifically on the midline or the median, you would produce a mid-sagittal section. So if you say mid-sagittal, you identify equal left and right halves. But if you're off to one side on purpose, and sometimes you're like that, it's parasagittal. or sometimes you see the word paramedian, same thing. Paramedian sections or parasagittal sections divide the subject into unequal left and right halves. And these are all, again, vertical sections, right? It doesn't matter if it's like this. This is still at a 90 degree to the horizontal, okay? 90 degree, 90 degree. You like that? So there's two vertical sections, only one horizontal section. Does that make sense? I hope so. So, but you got other angles besides 90 degrees, right? Well, any other angle, whether it's horizontal or vertical, right? Between that would be an oblique section. And sometimes you want to cut in an oblique section. An oblique would be, most of the time you think in and around 45 degrees. You know, if you cut like this, not like this, not like this, not like that, but kind of an angle, that would be an oblique section. So here I say, but between the horizontal and vertical. Now, body cavities. We identify these because you have actual physical structures that identify as spaces for your organs, right? And so they're all broken down into categories and subcategories. For example, you have a dorsal body cavity and a ventral body cavity. And the dorsal body cavity is divided simply into two subcavities. A cranial cavity, cranium, right? Your brain, skull, right? The hollow part of your skull for your brain, right? So that's part of your dorsal body cavity. And the inferior extension of that would be the hollow spaces produced by your vertebrae. All right, so that's for your spinal cord, brain, spinal cord. So spinal cavity or vertebral cavity or vertebral canal, same thing. That's all for the central nervous system, okay, brain and spinal cord. That's all part of the dorsal body cavity. So if that's dorsal, everything in front of that or anterior to that or ventral, right, would be the ventral body cavity. So you have one dorsal body cavity and one ventral body cavity. But everything in anterior to or ventral to the dorsal body cavity would be all your organs, right? And so it's divided up into categories and subcategories. The thoracic body cavity, okay? The thoracic body cavity is a ventral body cavity, but it is everything superior to the diaphragm. So the diaphragm physically delineates the thoracic body cavity, the inferior portion of it anyway. The thoracic body cavity, in turn, is divided into three subcavities. How about that? There's a single unpaired pericardial cavity to accommodate the heart, and then there are two pleural cavities, one for each lung. So you have a left pleural cavity for the left lung and a right pleural cavity for the right lung. Pleura, the word pleura without the L on the end, pleura, means lateral, all right? And so lateral to the heart would be the lungs. And so that's, anytime you hear pleura or pleural, it's referring to the lungs. So there you go. And so all of that, your heart and lungs, basically that's all you have in the thoracic body cavity. Now there's some other structures too, but these are the main organs in the thoracic body cavity. Now, but that's not all of your ventral body cavity. You have more to your ventral body cavity, right? So you got where all your digestive stuff is, and that's your abdominal pelvic body cavity. Look at the word abdominal pelvic. It's a compound term. Compound terms are made up of other terms, like other terms, you just kind of smash them together. So abdominal pelvic, abdomen, pelvic for pelvis. And so we break it down into two, obviously. An abdominal body cavity is a portion of the abdominal pelvic body cavity, which in turn is a portion of the ventral body cavity. Does that all make sense? You see how I've got this all laid out like this? So the abdominal cavity, which is a portion of the abdominal pelvic body cavity, but It's everything between the diaphragm and the pelvis. That makes sense? So what's it for? Well, I just say chiefly for digestive viscera. So basically your digestive system for the most part. You know, there's some overlap, obviously, but for right now, that's good enough. And so abdominal pelvic, so the inferior most portion of it would be the pelvic cavity. The pelvic cavity, everything's surrounded by the pelvis. The pelvis includes, the word pelvis means basin, like the basin of your torso. That's where everything is kind of rests. And it's comprised of, it's where the appendicular and axial skeletons come together. It's where your hips and your spine join. That forms your pelvis. It's your sacrum and your hip bones come together. And so there's the whole bony arena is created there. That's your pelvis. And there's really not a physical structure that delineates and separates the abdominal cavity from the pelvic cavity. You know, like there's a diaphragm that physically separates the abdominal pelvic from the thoracic body cavity. So there's a physical structure. There is no physical structure that separates these two. So you can very often, here, let me page up here for a sec, show you something. Oh, they don't really, they kind of show you this kind of brownish area, or sometimes they'll put like a dotted line right here. That there's nothing there physically, but if you look out to the sides, you'd have bone here, and bone in the front. So it's everything surrounded by bone would be the pelvic cavity. And so what's in there? Well, here I just have chiefly for, things like urinary bladder, rectum, internal reproductive structures. That's pretty good for structures of the pelvic cavity that's in there, okay? And now, to identify some specific spaces and talking about delineate or showing physical separations between areas, you need to understand the differences between different types of membranes and cavities. But we finished at 20 after. I don't want to start this and try to do it in 5 minutes. So let's quit right here. That's a good place to stop. So next time we'll know where to start. With Thursday, we will start membranes and cavities. And then after that, I think we'll probably be almost finished. Yeah, we'll finish this up. It's just a couple of slides, but there's a lot packed in those couple of slides. And then Thursday, we'll get into histology. So the next PowerPoint will be histology. And that's what we'll start that Thursday. Somewhere in here, I've got a histology PowerPoint, I think. I don't know where it is. Is it this PC? Documents. PP, that stands for PowerPoint, histology. Yeah, I'm going to open it. I'm going to leave it open for you guys until Thursday. So we'll finish up last membranes Thursday, and then start histology. Sounds like a plan. Any questions? Nope. Okay. I guess I better stop this meeting. Okay. I will see you guys Thursday.